We know there were 2 devices that exploded.
The explosion went off at the most crowded points of the race.
Hospital is now on a lockdown here at Brigham and Women's. The FBI, the ATF, state and local police, all here, armed guards.
When the Boston Marathon bombs went off and when we got confirmation that it was related to Islamic extremism and that the Tsarnaev brothers attended the Islamic Society of Boston, my first reaction was anger. We had been for 10 years warning the people of Massachusetts, the leaders of Massachusetts, and the law enforcement community of Massachusetts that this mosque is a potential breeding ground for terrorist recruitment and is a known source of the kind of Islamic extremist ideology that the Tsarnaev brothers professed to hold.
We have seen an extraordinary effort by law enforcement, intelligence, and public safety agencies.
Despite criticism that the FBI missed some warning signs, Mueller said neither incident was preventable.
We believe this to be a terrorist. We believe this to be a man who's come here to kill people.
I wish I could say it felt like vindication, but it didn't. What's there to be vindicated about? People died, and we couldn't stop it.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Laurie Dew. When terrorists struck the city of Boston on Patriots' Day 2013, there was a scramble to identify who was behind the deadly bombings. Once the Tsarnaev brothers were accused of the attacks, the media began investigating nearly every aspect of their lives, but most missed their connection to a controversial mosque. The Islamic Society of Boston has a history of extremism, and a number of its members have been convicted of terror-related charges. For more than a decade, there's been clear evidence of radicalization at the mosque. Law enforcement officials were warned. How they responded might be the most disturbing part of our story, especially for the people of Boston. The Islamic Society of Boston, or ISB, was founded in the mid-1990s. It was located in a small facility in Cambridge. In late 2002, leaders broke ground on a massive expansion project across town in Roxbury.
One day I was going out for lunch, and I noticed in the news box there, where they sell the Herald, the Boston Herald, a big headline that the mosque, there was going to be a mosque in Boston. It was going to be a $20 million mosque, the biggest mosque maybe on the East Coast.
Charles Jacobs is the head of Americans for Peace and Tolerance, which he co-founded in late 2008 in Boston.
We did a little bit more of our own researching, and the strangest thing is, the mayor of Boston gave these people a piece of land that Boston had valued at $2 million for less than $200,000. So he gave it away for a song.
The land sale was handled by Mohammed Ali Salam of the Boston Redevelopment Authority. From the start, there was a conflict of interest. At the same time Salam was selling city property to the ISB, he was also the group's primary fundraiser. However, Boston Mayor Thomas Menino didn't see a problem and developed a close relationship with Salam, even offering him a public tribute in August 2013.
And that's what's so important here today, because we're honoring an individual who gave of himself so many different times because he wanted to make a difference. Fitting tribute to a guy who given his life to this community, this city, this country. Thank you very much.
You know, he did that because, like any mayor in any American city right now, the only frame through which he sees any of these issues is that the Muslim community must be treated like another vulnerable minority. And if I don't cooperate them, I will be seen as a bigot, Islamophobe, racist.
It's supposed to be the largest mosque on the East Coast. And it's located, on the one hand, in a rapidly developing area.
Ilya Feoktistov is the Director of Research for Americans for Peace and Tolerance.
The thing is with ISB is most of its founders and members are affiliated with Harvard or MIT. That's why their original mosque was based in Cambridge.
The ISB expansion drew more attention to the mosque, highlighting the fact that many of its leaders had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood.
I think it starts with the fact that the first cue is that the person who wrote the foundational document implementing it was Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who is the founder, or one of the founders of many Muslim Brotherhood front groups in America, and is now in prison as an al-Qaeda operative.
The mosque was founded by Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, a man who the FBI had successfully prosecuted and put in jail for 23 years for funding al-Qaeda and for getting into an assassination plot with Libya's former president Muammar Gaddafi.
He's the model for deception. And this topic should be called deception, because what they do is they come to you and they smile and they tell you that we are precisely the kind of Muslims that America needs to bridge the cultural gaps. He was in both White Houses as an advisor. He got Clinton to give him the ability to choose which Muslim chaplains would be the ones that would operate in the army. So al-Amoudi is key and should be the poster boy of radical Muslim penetration into American society.
A number of investigative journalists, specifically those at the Boston Herald, began reporting on the ISB's connections to terror organizations and its radical teachings. But city leaders, especially the mayor, refused to acknowledge any of the information.
If Menino had Googled, if he had spent 3 minutes Googling who the people were that the money was going to, that the land was going to, that this base of radical Islam was going to be owned and controlled by, he wouldn't give them the mosque. He wouldn't even want them to get off the plane at Logan to come set foot in Boston.
After a wave of investigative stories, in 2005, the ISB sued the Boston Herald and several other groups, including Charles Jacobs' organization, claiming defamation.
These are the 41 boxes or so of discovery materials that we were able to subpoena from the Islamic Society of Boston when they sued us.
The great part of being sued is, and something they didn't count on, is that you can do discovery. And you can really get into the inner workings of what they do.
Every check they've ever written between the years 2000 and 2007, we have it right here.
So, for example, they sued us for defamation. Well, if they make such a claim, we have a right to defend against that claim by basically subpoenaing all their bank records, which we did and which we combed through, and that is where we got our data on the vast sums of money that came from Saudi Arabia into their coffers, and data showing financial transactions with terrorism-affiliated entities, people like Abdullah Kamel, Osama bin Laden's banker in Sudan, and several terrorist-affiliated entities in Boston, actually.
Another key figure named as one of the founders of the ISB, a controversial Muslim Brotherhood leader named Yusuf al-Qaradawi.
وأيد المقاومة وأيد الجهاد وأيد حماس وأيد جماعة الجهاد وأيد حزب الله. إنني ضد السلام الذي تريد أن تمليه إسرائيل وأمريكا وهو سلام موهوم.
A man named Qaradawi, who now we know is a spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, who tells throngs of people in Cairo that every Jew on the planet must be slaughtered. He was listed as a trustee. So we got pretty concerned. Gee, what's happening here?
The mayor of Boston giving a large chunk of Boston city property to a mosque that was affiliated with a man named Yusuf Qaradawi, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, who I have seen a lot of sermons online. And these sermons were extremely anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and I thought, why are they bringing such horrible ideology into the cradle of liberty in Boston?
When you have a How to Beat Your Wife page on your website, that's pretty hateful. When you have Yusuf Qaradawi, who is on your board, explaining that the way Muslims have to treat homosexuals is somewhat of a debate. Some scholars say you have to throw them off a mountain, and some say you have to burn them. That's the extent of the debate. When you have that happening, that's hate. If any other group in the world, if some church or if some synagogue or if the KKK, if anybody said this about any other people, that would be considered a hate crime, and they would be at least socially ostracized and not drawn into the bosom of the community.
On May 29, 2007, as the trial was set to begin, the ISB suddenly dropped its lawsuit without acknowledging any of the accusations. When For the Record returns, we'll show you the conclusive evidence of radicalization that was presented to federal law enforcement well before the Boston bombings. Welcome back to For the Record. As we continue our story, we're going to show you the specific terrorist connections to the Islamic Society of Boston and show you the type of radicalization the Tsarnaev brothers were exposed to before they launched their deadly attack.
Would it be fair to call the Islamic Society of Boston a radical?
Yes, sir. I witnessed myself when I was in 1 year visiting fellow at Harvard Law School, 2003-2004. I passed a street and found a small mosque, a green one, and I wanted to pray al-Maghrib, the sunset, and my wife was me.
Ahmed Mansour is an Islamic reformer. He fled his native Egypt in 2002 amid threats from the Muslim Brotherhood. He was shocked by what he found the day he went to pray at the ISB.
I went upstairs to a room and I found this room is full of Arabic translators that attacking America, attacking Jews, attacking Christians, talking about jihad against. I was so scared at that time. So when I returned back to Virginia here, some people from Boston contacted me and say we are in fear of just radicals people here. I said you are right.
I can only imagine the way Ahmed Mansour felt when he came into that mosque and realized that the very terrible strain of Islam that he ran away from when he left Egypt had preceded him and had beat him onto American soil. And there he was confronted with the same people that tortured him.
The problem here is the radicalization of the historically moderate Muslim community in Boston and in America. That's the problem. Because what's happening to these kids is that they're being poisoned. We have found the curriculum that the mosques use to radicalize Boston's Muslim youth.
In 2009, Jacobs and members of his organization conducted a formal briefing on the Islamic Society of Boston with the FBI.
The FBI called us and asked to be briefed about it. On May 1, 2009, we briefed the FBI in a session that lasted over an hour and a half. And I know what we briefed them on because we have the PowerPoint. We showed them who was in control of the mosque.
Highlighting Jacob's presentation was evidence tying a number of key members of the mosque directly to terrorism.
The Tsarnaev brothers lived blocks away from this mosque and attended this mosque and prayed in this mosque. And by the way, they're not the only terrorists who are associated with that mosque. Afia Siddiqui, who is now in jail for decades and decades.
The woman dubbed Lady Al-Qaeda has been convicted of attempted murder of Americans in Afghanistan. Afia Siddiqui was captured in Afghanistan in 2008. Authorities say Siddiqui was caught with plans for a mass casualty attack on New York landmarks.
She was a member of that mosque. Tariq Mahana, who's a man who's also in jail, went to that mosque. And he's in jail because he was plotting to shoot shoppers at a shopping mall in Attleboro, Massachusetts. He went to that mosque. So the Tsarnaev brothers are the third group of people, young Muslim people, who were associated with the mosque that Alamudi built.
At the end of the presentation, I loaded the PowerPoint onto a flash drive and gave it to them. So yes, it was in their possession.
That was the last contact Americans for Peace and Tolerance had with the FBI.
Despite criticism that the FBI missed some warning signs, Mueller said neither incident was preventable. A 2011 Russian warning about bombing suspect Tamerlan Tsarnaev turned up no terrorist connections.
But you're satisfied that the FBI in the Boston case, before the event, did a thorough job?
Yes. The FBI never canvassed Boston mosques until 4 days after the April 15th attacks. If the Russians tell you that someone has been radicalized and you go check and see the mosques that they went to, then you get the articles of incorporation, as I have, for the group that created the Boston mosque where these Tsarnaevs attended, and you find out the name Alamudi. Were you aware that those mosques were started by Alamudi?
I've answered the question, sir.
You didn't answer the question. Were you aware they were started by Alamudi? You were not. Okay.
I think that the FBI wants to always be completely shocked when something happens right before their eyes, and so they make sure that they didn't understand what was briefed to them when it was briefed. I know that might sound like I'm being facetious, but that would be just me replaying all the times I've done the same types of briefings.
Stephen Coughlin served as an intelligence officer in the Pentagon, focusing on information operations in the war on terror.
The FBI is driven by ideological requirements that get in the way of their doing their job to support and defend the Constitution and protect American citizens.
There was no response to our PowerPoint that we know of. What we do know is that after 2009, the FBI had engaged in extensive outreach with the Islamic Society of Boston.
Yes, Anwar Kazmi is the man who the FBI outreaches to and who is the main spokesperson for that mosque, and who pretends to be a moderate.
He wants to assure everyone that they have nothing to do with terrorism and that the mosque is committed to fighting against it.
Anwar Kazmi, we have him on film in the middle of the Boston Common in a famous gazebo spot in the Boston Common, supporting Afia Siddiqui and Tariq Mahana.
When somebody like Afia Siddiqui, who was charged only for attempting to harm a U.S. soldier, is sentenced to 86 years in prison, a virtual life sentence for her. And when Tariq Mahana faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life in a supermax prison, I think it sends a very, very powerful message about the U.S. system of justice and what are the people all over the world supposed to take from that.
While one day the FBI might try to hold a career fair in the mosque, the other day the mosque is holding events attacking the FBI and supporting convicted terrorists. That's the definition of outreach as it currently exists with the Islamic Society of Boston and the FBI.
I would say that the issue is that we have decided that outreach is more important than national security, and effective relationships is more important than the safety of citizens, and that's just what you're seeing. In the interest of trust and getting along, there's no due diligence on who they are.
We have many relations, good relations, with moderate Muslims in Boston who come and talk to us secretly because they're afraid.
The immigrant Muslims here, they love their religion, and being, stranger, alien, they want something, they find in the mosque the relief. So when the imam is fanatic, he can deceive them, he can radicalize them, and that's what is happening.
Political correctness is blinding us, is blinding our leaders. I mean, political correctness might just well be our suicide bomb, you know? But what people haven't understood is that many of these kids, the Tsarnaev brothers, they came here, they were not radical. They were regular kids. And by not paying attention to what's happening in these mosques, to the radicalization process in these mosques, you're abandoning kids who would have been fine. You're poisoning their souls. You're letting them become murderers. This is horrible.
So this is the painful fact. The radical Sunni imams control most of the American mosques.
My last thing, what went through your mind when you heard about the bombing?
I failed.